Owning a home has been seen as the ultimate form of adulthood and is a sign that you're doing well in your life. It's the American dream and is often seen as a symbol of success. But nowadays, it may seem impossible to buy a home with these astronomical prices and interest rates at 20-year highs.
Home prices hitting another high.
And it's more than double from 2 years ago.
Higher mortgage rates, which are near a 22-year high.
And all the while, job wages haven't been keeping up. But do you actually need a home to be considered a success? After all, there are several finance gurus who say that owning a home is actually a liability instead of an asset. And one of the people that I follow is Ramit Sethi. I read his book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, back in 2015, and it helped me set up my financial foundation so that I could get to where I am today. And apparently, he doesn't even own a home even though he's really well off. And as a real estate investor and advocate for owning your own home, I'm super interested to see what he has to say and see if I agree with his opinions or not.
I'm a multimillionaire and I don't own my house and I don't invest in any property. But why? Isn't a house a great investment? Isn't buying property a great place to put your money? And surely it's better than throwing your money away on rent, right?
I enjoy buying properties and I enjoy receiving rent from my tenants.
Well, when you run the numbers, that's actually often wrong. And I've been saying this for years on my podcast, in my book, even on my Netflix show. You've been lied to about buying property. And in this video, I'm going to break down once and for all the 4 main parts that you need to know so that by the end, you'll have a clear idea of the true costs of buying a house and what you should do.
I think the main issue is that most people don't know how to run their numbers. So they're buying properties with the idea that it will grow in value over time without really considering the fact that as you're buying and holding on to the property, you have to pay for insurance, property taxes, interest on your mortgage, as well as any repairs that happen on your property.
Starting with part 1, the dream you've been sold. What is the American dream? If you're like most people, you picture a single family home with a white picket fence and 2.5 kids and a dog. Think about it. That is not an accident.
For my wife and I, we enjoy owning properties, but we're not so convinced about having pets or having too many children because we found that our friends who have too many of these things tend to be held back. You know, like they're not able to just move and travel wherever they want to because they have responsibilities at home.
Where did that dream come from? That dream is the result of decades of marketing. Some people might even call it propaganda. Let me explain what I mean. Most people in the world do not live in single family homes like we do in America, and yet we believe this is the only measure of success. Next up, think about the numbers themselves. Decades ago, your parents' generation, certainly their parents, a house would cost roughly 2.5x your annual income. People would put down 20%, and the total monthly payments would be about or less than 30% of your gross income.
These are actually pretty interesting numbers. So if I remember correctly, my mom told me that at the time, she was making between $30,000 and $40,000 as an engineer in the Bay Area, and our house was worth $200,000. So it's about 5 times her income. So nowadays, as an engineer, you probably make between $100,000 and $150,000 if you're just starting out in the Bay Area. But homes there are now, $1.2 to $1.5 million. So you're almost at a 10x times multiple of your base salary. Wages definitely have not kept up with home prices.
If you make $50,000 a year, gross income before taxes, that means that your house would cost $125,000. Do you know any houses right now that you'd want to live in for $125,000? And in that same example of $50K a year income, you'd put $25,000 down and your total monthly payments would be $1,250 per month.
It's hard to even find a rent for $1,250 a month though. So that's just the housing market in general.
Have you ever seen a house like that in your entire lifetime?
I have, and they're out of state.
No, things are different now, and yet we are still operating on these old rules that have been passed down to us without taking into account how things have changed. And this still doesn't explain the craziness of people who buy houses for 5 times, 10 times their salary with 3% down. And I'm telling you this because if you buy something you cannot afford, it might seem like you are buying your way into the American dream, but oftentimes it will come around and bite you in the ass.
I know some friends who don't make a lot wage-wise, but they do want to buy a property. They're asking me, how can I get in with a 3% down payment loan? What do I do if my credit score isn't very high? Honestly, I tell them, look, if this is all of your money you're putting into just one property, it's probably not a good idea to do it. You can start small, but if you put all of your assets in just one property, especially the one you live in, and you're barely able to make these mortgage payments, it's really going to hurt you long term. You're going to be struggling financially and you're going to be stressed out because if something happens to your job, you're going to have a hard time continuing to make these mortgage payments and you might get foreclosed on, right? I wouldn't recommend that you do that. For us, I even tell all the people who want to buy investment properties that they should have more than the bare minimum, right? You should have at least enough for your down payment, your closing costs, maybe 6 months worth of reserves, plus some more just in case something happens to that property. So definitely, I would encourage you to save as much as you can before buying a house.
The myths about owning a home. There are 4 main myths about home ownership, and I want you to know each of them. Myth number 1, prices in real estate always go up.
This is very interesting to me because home prices definitely have increased over time for majority of the places that you buy properties in. But of course, there are places that are receding in price. Like if people are moving out of a location, naturally the home prices will go down there. Because as I've mentioned on my channel, if you're flipping homes in an area and there has to be like a short-term downturn and you're caught in the middle of that, then of course you might have to sell at a big fat loss. I didn't really understand what he meant by like not reducing your price, but doing other ways to reduce your price. Like when it comes to rate buy downs, etc. like that, these are just seller credits, right? So you are offering a concession to the buyer. So you're saying, okay, I'll give you some seller credits to help repair this property or give you seller credits to buy down your rate because mortgage rates are really high right now. You know, at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure the sellers are still selling at a profit for what they sold it for. And even with the 2008 recession, there are a lot of investors that bought during that time and then when the market recovered, they made 2x or 3x their money.
Myth number 2, the value of a house doubles every 10 years.
Okay, I don't know who says that myth. I never believed that a house price would increase that much over 10 years as like a guarantee. I think typically they say that inflation is about 3% a year. So we base our numbers off that. Honestly, when I buy my investments, I'm always looking at the long-term effects of it. What's the passive income I can get from this property? What are the tax benefits I can get from owning this property? And of course, if I get appreciation on top of it, then it's a cherry on top if I ever sell.
Most people forget to factor in phantom costs. Phantom costs are all the costs of a house that most people forget about. They're phantoms. They include things like closing costs, taxes, property insurance, maintenance, repairs, even the gas to drive to Home Depot that you use and your time, and of course, the cost, the opportunity cost of that down payment and what you could have made if you simply invested it in an S&P 500 index fund.
Now, this is really good points here too. So when you're selling a property, you should expect to have 8% of the sales price as a closing cost. 6% goes to your agent who then splits that 50-50 with the buyer's agent. Property taxes are going to be between 1% and 3% of the property's value every single year. So in some states, this can be very, very high. We budget in 10% of the gross rents for the maintenance and repairs. You do pay around $1,000 to $2,000 per property for insurance, depending on what kind of property you have.
In fact, it's actually quite common that you could sell your house for a higher price than you paid for it and still lose money when you factor in all the phantom costs.
That's absolutely true. So I would say when it comes to buying a home and even investment properties, you must think long term. Don't think to just buy a property, invest in it, live in it for 1 or 2 years and sell. It typically won't work out very well there.
Number 3, you can use leverage to increase your money. This is partially true, and homeowners often point to leverage as a key benefit. You can put $20,000 down for a $100,000 house. If the house climbs to $120K, you effectively doubled your money. That is true, but remember this, leverage works on the way up as well as the way down.
So this is true as well. Of course, if prices go down by 10% and you've only had a 10% down payment, effectively your equity is completely wiped out and you could be technically underwater. But the good thing about real estate is that as long as you continue making your mortgage payments, then the bank will have a reason to foreclose on you. And then you can just ride out the wave and hopefully the value recovers and you're able to make up the money over time. For example, my mom had a house in the Bay Area and it was worth around $460,000 in 2007. Then during the 2008-2009 crash, it went down to around $300,000 or so. However, because we've kept the home in our family, that property is now worth $1.2 million.
Myth number 4, I can deduct my mortgage interest from my taxes and save a bunch of money. Look, tax savings are great, but most people forget that they are saving money that they ordinarily never would have spent.
I don't believe that people should be buying a house just so they can save on the taxes because of the mortgage interest they pay. Because like I said, if you rent a home, you don't even pay property taxes to begin with. So who cares about saving your taxes on the money you paid in taxes, right? But here's the thing, when you buy a property, the amount you spend every month is technically fixed, right? You're gonna be paying your mortgage over 30 years, you're paying insurance, you'll be paying property taxes, which may or may not change that much depending on what state you're buying your property property in. So yes, it may be higher than your rent today, but what about in 10 years? What about in 20 years? What if a landlord were to kick you out one day and this has been your home for the last 15 years? It's going to be kind of a hard pill to swallow when you have to move out and suddenly the rents you go to are like double what you're paying before. That's why it's actually pretty nice to own your own properties, because yes, you may be paying a little bit more now today, but at least you know that your costs are relatively fixed and you know that's your property. You can raise your family there, you can store all of your garbage in the garage, and it's going to be all good.
When you ask people, for example, what tax deductions, they often go, oh, tax deductions. I go, what tax deductions? Most people have no idea what a tax deduction even is, much less which ones apply to their housing situation.
So one thing to know about owning a property though, is you can take advantage of section 121, which says that if you lived in a property for 2 out of the last 5 years, then you can deduct $250,000 of gains when you sell the property. And this is one of the most powerful tax saving things of all time, and it's doubled if you're married and file jointly.
Always run the numbers. Have you heard this phrase? If you rent, you're just throwing your money away, or you're paying your landlord's mortgage. I got a question for you. Would you say the same thing about eating out? Would you say, ugh, you're paying the restaurant owner's mortgage when you eat that sushi? No.
But it's kind of true, because we buy our properties using analysis and knowing that the rents that we get will cover the mortgage payment, insurance, property taxes, and give some profit at the end of the month. So technically they are paying for our mortgage. So nothing wrong with that. It's a business, right?
I want you to pay close attention, especially when you are talking about high cost of living cities like New York, LA, San Francisco, 3 cities I have lived in. Buying can be way more expensive than renting.
It's interesting because right now we're living in Taiwan and the rent to price ratio here is so out of whack that I would not buy here in Taiwan, because you can buy a property for 1 million USD and only rent it out for around $1,500. So you're really not getting that much rent from owning this property and putting all of your money here.
When I was living in New York City, I kept a very close eye on real estate. I was renting a nice place and I saw that there was a unit right next door. Same view, same square footage, same number of bedrooms and bathrooms, and I tracked it. It would have cost me 2.2 times more to own than what I was paying in rent. Let's just say I was paying $3,000 a month in rent. It would have cost me $6,600 a month to own an equivalent property. You know what I did instead? I said, first of all, I like renting. If I have a problem, I just text my landlord. And second, I took the $3,600 extra dollars I would have spent owning and I just invested it in the market. And guess what? I made more money doing that, renting and investing the difference, than I would have owning.
The interesting thing about this is he's talking about all of these super expensive cost of living areas. And these places actually have rent control. So if you rent a place here, so you might actually be able to pay very little as long as you can get in an early enough time and just stay in that one unit for a very, very long time. But I guess the big question comes is, what happens if you want to move? I don't know, like I get where he's coming from, and I personally wouldn't invest in those areas or buy in those areas. And because in the last 10 years, New York has seen a huge boom in prices as well. So I really wonder what the difference would be between his actual investments and his return on investment, given that, again, you can get a loan and all that stuff too.
I'm not saying your financial situation will be exactly the same, but if you buy a house without opening up a spreadsheet and entering some numbers, you are making a huge mistake. I want you to run the numbers. I want you to look at the home you're thinking of buying and calculate the true cost. That includes property taxes, which will go up, maintenance costs, which are unpredictable but still need to be factored in, even the $25,000 roof repair that's going to happen 11 years from now. You need to properly account for that now. Mortgage payments, opportunity cost. Use this to work out the real monthly payment of owning a house. And then compare that number to the cost of renting a similar property. If owning is considerably more, then financially speaking, it might make sense to rent and invest the difference. On the other hand, you might discover that it makes great financial sense to own. If that's the case, God bless. But I want you to understand these numbers before you make the biggest purchase of your life.
One thing that's interesting though is I've been recently watching some videos about lottery winners, and there are people who take the lump sum and some that take the annuity payment, meaning just don't give me the whole lump sum right now, give me these small payments over time. And while most people will say that's a bad financial decision, I personally would probably take the annuity option as well, because it's a secure payment that's always going to come to you for years and years to come. Whereas there are people who take the lump sum payment and then invest it all right away. But then what happens if you invest in 2007 and then in 2008 crash comes along, then you just lost your entire fortune. So the same thing can be said about investing the difference versus owning a property. Because if you just own your house, you don't have to think too much, just live in it, and over time the property tends to go up in price, right? Whereas if you invest the money instead and all the money's gone, then 30 years can go by and you have no assets, your investments are pretty bad, and then you're left with nothing. So kind of a weird place to be, right?
Now, what about property as an investment vehicle? What about buying a property and renting it out? Well, I will say that it can work, but you've got to really know your numbers. And in my experience, most landlords do not even know their own basic numbers, much less are they able to properly plan and set aside money and treat owning a property as a business. In fact, in my experience, over half of the people who write to me in financial trouble are there because of one of two things: their housing costs or how much they spend on their cars. So buying a house should be thought of as a purchase first, a very expensive purchase, and an investment second. Why? Why do you need to think about your house as a purchase, not an investment? Let me tell you, there are two reasons. First, the problem of risk. If your house is your biggest investment, then how diversified is your portfolio? Think about it. If you're paying $2,000 a month to a mortgage, are you investing $6,000 a month elsewhere to balance your risk? Of course not.
This is why, again, I tell people not to put all their eggs in one basket. For us, we have around 30 units. So if one property goes sour, then we're okay because we have all these other properties that are making up for it. And we also have properties in different markets too. So if one city decides to suddenly stop performing, it's okay because, again, we have other properties there too.
Real estate in general offers a pretty poor return for individual investors. Yale economist Robert Shiller found that from 1915 through 2015, home prices increased on average only 0.6% per year.
This is kind of a weird skewed data thing because he's looking at the national average. But what about in the major metros, right? So you can't just pick any random place to invest in. Pick a place that has good appreciation potential, good population growth, good job growth. And you guys want to see more about how you do that? Check out this video of how we analyze properties over here.
So how am I planning ahead to buy a house? Well, here are 5 questions I'm asking myself, and I recommend you do the same. Question number 1, will I live here for 10 plus years? That's because when it comes to all the costs that you will incur, including those transaction costs and closing costs, you want to amortize or spread them out over 10 years. It's kind of like buying a new car. The minute you drive it off the lot, it loses a pretty sizable percentage. That's the same thing with a house, but nobody talks about it. The minute you buy a house, you lose tens of thousands of dollars. So you want to spread those costs out over at least 10 years. That way you have a very good shot at coming out with a good financial outcome.
Or you can buy a property that's really run down, put some money into repairing it, and then sell it for a big fat profit, right? That's flipping houses.
Question number 2, will my total monthly housing costs be less than 28% of my gross income? Let me explain. This is really important to know. Why gross income? Because some people take out tons of money to max out their 401k. We want to start from apples to apples gross income. Why 28%? Well, typically that was considered a good amount to manage risk. It's really hard to stay below that number. So maybe in a high cost of living city with low amount of debt, you can stretch it 32, 33%, but you want to be very careful because the higher you go, the more risk you have and the less you will be able to have any money to do anything else.
Most banks allow 43% debt to income ratio, which basically equates to 43% of gross income. The thing is, if you go for 20%, there's a good chance that you may not be able to buy any property. So, it's one of those situations where you either try your best and get as much as you can, or you stay as conservative as possible and then don't buy a house. Kind of sucks to be in this situation, right? Again, I think liquidity is the most important factor here. So have enough so that if you lose your job, you still have 6 months worth of payments that you can afford. And hopefully that gives you enough time to get a new job to continue making your mortgage payments.
Question number 3, have I saved 20% for a down payment?
Now, while I do think it's best practice to save 20%, you don't always have to do this. So we've actually purchased properties with just 5% down because it was very easy and we got a very low interest rate on it. Of course, these days, with rates at 7 to 8%, I think it's in your best interest to put down as much as you can, if you can.
Question number 4, am I okay if the value of my house goes down? Well, you should be okay because house prices go up and house prices go down. Question number 5, am I excited about buying? I could go out and buy a house today, and I choose not to. I want you to be empowered to run the numbers and make a decision for your rich life.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to have buyer's remorse when you buy a property, because again, this may be one of the biggest purchases that you're ever going to have for your whole life. So you want to be happy with your purchase. So yeah, I agree with maybe half of what he said in this video. Overall, he's saying that you can buy properties as long as you run the numbers, but don't buy a property with the expectation that's going to make you a multimillionaire, because this is a long-term game. I'm more in the mindset of buy a property, hold it for a very long time. Ideally, don't even sell it. But generally speaking, we buy our properties for the rental income because it gives us passive income to then live our lives. So we can go travel and do whatever we want. So anyways, I love this video and I love this guy's work. If you guys haven't already, go subscribe to him. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.